Okay, so hello everybody. This is the last session of the Punishment in Global Peripheries workshop. Very happy to see you all here. Of course, it's been a long journey. So yeah, in this last session, we have Sergio Grossi of the University of Padua and Fluminense Federal University. He will be presenting his research on lessons from the periphery, the experience of social reintegration centers in Brazil. And then after him, Valeria Reis of Freie Universität, I won't be able to say that, Freie Universität Berlin.
Perfect.
And University of Buenos Aires. She will be presenting her research, Learning from the South, Transitional Justice Experiences and the Role of Victims Organizations. And then following her presentation, Stefan Parmentier will be the discussant, so he will have some comments. So the speakers will have up to 20 minutes. Stefan, as a discussant, will have 10. And then we will start the Q&A. So I think it's all from me. Sergio, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay, we start. Okay, and then many thanks for this workshop. Then I will thank the organization and also the other participants. And I will talk about my research in Brazil. And my background is quite different, maybe because I'm from education and then in philosophy and psychology. Then I started to think about this research with the prison failure to perform inclusive, reintegrative and education role, and in the incarceration of excluded person, in particular migrant in Europe. And for this, I started to think on redesign of reintegration and education with the Basaglia experience and reference, with the construction of the reintegration beyond total institution and the comparative function of the asylum and prison in Italy, and the critical conceptualization of reintegration of Baratta, and at the same time on the study on the education and prison of Fanny Salan in Paris Dis, and Julião in the Università Federal Fluminense Rio de Janeiro, and offshore the pedagogy of the oppressed of Paulo Freire. For this experience was one of the inspiration of the applied pedagogy, as I say, of the Association for the Protection and Assistance of Convicted Person in Brazil. It was like the experience that I studied. This was interesting for me because it's an experience that was exporting the global north. There are more than 20 countries that have experienced by the APAC system, inclusive in Italy and Germany. Was awarded by South American Social Enterprise of the Year, and they claim a lower recidivism, but we have to discuss this, and a reduction of cost of the maintenance of the people inside the structure, and is a consolidated experience with many years and many people passed by this unity, and it is a managerialized public policy, and is candidate to being like Brazilian national policy. Then in the method, I analyzed the description of this model to the key books of the founder and the president that was used to spread the model, and the APAC regulation that ruled this unity. And for the analysis of the practice, quickly, I do the review of the Brazilian academic literature on the model, and I do a brief ethnography with participant observation and open and semi-structured interview in two of the best model of the APAC implementation, particularly in Itaúna and São João del Rei. I lived inside this unit for 14 days, sharing the life with prisoner and then also the staff. We see quickly some photo that I take it in this field. It was the internal area of this kind of model. Also this room for the family visit, and the biblioteca, the school, and the online university, and the non-formal and informal educational activity, with also the former convicted that are actually working in educative planning with the actual inmate in the APAC system. There are the space for working. We can see that there are different kinds of projects that may be used as a weapon in a context with a potential conflict open. And then there are these kind of work. And in particular, there are the security that was like most impressive. In the left side, there are one of the portero or social educator, as they call. This was like the only presence that was not convicted when I was in the field period of Itaúna. And in the right, we see the voluntary that take the inmates with the tribunal without armed police also. Then they, in this year, make this methodology with 12 points. We see quickly the first point is the participation of the community, because we started as a project of voluntary that have taken the management of a reintegrative system together with the prisoner. And the point 2 is inmates help inmates, and it's like the peer education between the people that are inside this structure that is fundamental for the management of this kind of system. We can see different classic activities as work, as formal education and professionalization. But one of the other things that is important is that they build the point 10, the separated center of social reintegration, which was administered by voluntary and functionary that is not directly in the dependence of the prison administration, and there are other paths for being director in this structure. What I see that in this structure there are a reduced domain of the security problem, and they claim that no one is recoverable. That is APAC, one of the APAC slogan. And I found people of that have and 30 years of sentence with homicide, rapist, serial rapist, and also people that have disciplinary problem are inside this unit because the APAC system say that maybe the violence inside the prison system can generate violence inside the inmates, and they offer the possibility of entering the structure. For convincing the society, they utilize the slogan of the shift from security of punishment to security of reintegration as a security policy. And I find in this model that there are formal and non-formal education available for everyone. There was 14 inmates studying at the university, someone at presential university and the other online. And there are the activity are characterizing this kind of center all the day. And there are different work activity with the centrality of the trustworthy relationship, because the APAC explained that when they build a major community, it will be a big problem of the maintenance of this kind of structure. And there are also the prison-only cell and regime meeting, where the prisoner discussing about the functioning of the structure. There are other research that say that inside the APAC system there are the form distinguished acculturation of the code of honor that we can find in the Brazilian prison system. And for example, there are rapists and pedophiles that live together with other inmates. The idea of the APAC is that they have to structure educative plan with this for avoiding violence directly in this part and not before, because because otherwise the people will commit violence and then will be catched and inserted otherwise other time in prison. There are absence of internal and external armed prison guards, also in the external perimeter, and there are co-management of the discipline with the inmates and former prisoners, because there are different former prisoners that are actually working in the APAC structure, and these work as reducing the rigid division between security office and prisoners. The idea is also that the work, the educative work with the society, and for this, for example, there are centrality of the unity in the space of the city. For example, in Itaúna was in the richest part of the city. And they try to overcome the obstacle imposed by the legal power that don't trust on reintegration. And for example, they obtain in the Minas Gerais public policy that the judge have to spend 1 day inside the APAC unit. And they try to open the space for the people as a school, judge, politician, technician, and citizen come, enter, and see which kind of the difference can be possible with this system, and then also work with the pedagogy of presence and the testimony in the society for avoiding the 5-star critics that the people, there are some people that when enter say that this like a 5-star hotel and so on, and then they try to explain to the society where the people that are passing inside this unity are actually living and doing things. The possible effect, we see that there are some research that say that there are more respect for human rights. In particular, this is based on the comparison of the Brazilian system that we have seen in other research. Then the prisoner believe in the possibility of social reintegration, and the APAC can be a possibility for socially excluded people that start to study and do formal work inside this structure. And there are also a reduction of stigma with the mediation of the APAC system. Also, there are some research about the recidivism, because we already said that it's problematic. Because we know that there are the selectivity problem, because for entering in the APAC system, the prisoner have to compromise himself to do educative, working, spiritual, and disciplinary activity inside the unit, and then this will select a part of the prisoner, not all the prisoner, and in particular the prisoner that are involved with a criminal organization can refuse to enter in the APAC system. And also there are structural difficulties in measuring education success with the recidivism rate, because we know that it's a complex problem with the question of the recidivism. And we need more independent study on this. There are also similarity with the classic prison. Then there are characteristics of total institution. There are submission of subject to internal rules, schedule and routine to continuous surveillance. In this case, was the other inmates that have to do the majority of the surveillance. There are production of docile body, useful for work and not politically dangerous. Also that we have to think that the APAC system is inside the Brazilian penal system and with the hidden capital punishment. And we know that the system, the Brazilian system, don't to seize body, but destroy the life of the people that are inside the structure, the prison, the Brazilian prison. And there are also the existence of professors and staff that have a critical view and inclusive. There are formal political prisoners during the dictatorship that are director of the unity, then we have to think about what it will be political dangerous inserted in the Brazilian context. The stigma is still present in some APAC, in some cases, inclusive, and there are this the problem in the access of the labor market because when I was in the structure was a big economical crisis in Brazil, and this can be influenced, but it's really hard to get work also before the APAC system, also because before this experience. Then other problem is the dependence of the existence of the prison system, because the people that don't respect the rule inside can be reinserted inside the normal prison. That is a characteristic of all alternative, but in the APAC case is really dangerous, because people that was involved in disciplinary activity can be treated as police officer and then have to stay in the seguro, in the part with the pedophilia and rapists and the people that can be attacked by the other prisoner. The life change is considered from a strong individual perspective, but at the same time, the education project work also with family staff, voluntary, and judiciary and educative system. One of the other problems is spiritually as a requirement for access to this structure, but there are presence of Afro-related religion and attempt toward inter-religious dialogue when I was in the field period, and also there are employers and unit directors that are not Christian, and there are intimate visits for homosexual in the unit, in explicit in the rules, but also in the practice that I do interview with these people when I was in the field. And the low cost of this model is also because the work of prison is poorly or not paid inside the structure, and this is other problem that was open. Then, in the conclusion, we can see that the living condition of all people inside the prison must be improved in order to reduce conflict and not to make education work viable. And also, informal education dynamic of both internal with the inmates and the functional and external context with the society must be considered in order to build projects that break the chain of criminalization. And education should also be community-centered, promoting the reception of the related individual and reducing stigmatization. For this, a different return to society is possible when compared to the total institution. And the APAC can be a part of the constellation of alternative institutions and considered a concrete utopia that can permit use to go beyond contemporary prison, but not the one, is one of the alternative. And for this, other model of education for integration must be studied. It is of crucial importance to empathize inclusive the weakness of the model of the global north and the potential offered by the model experience in the global south. The privation of liberty remains, in all the cases, a problem in the contemporary society because it remains selective and classist and racist, and it's necessary to provide education to society in terms of prison issues also, as the APAC do. Other model experience quickly, we can see the prison town of Punta de Rieles. They are managed by university in prison in Argentina. And for example, the Island prison of Bastui that is claimed as model experience, but in fact is in Iceland, separated for the society for 1 hour trajectory. Then the people maybe don't escape for this. And then for this idea is the next idea is make a comparison of this kind of model. Then there is no good prison, but there are some worse than other. I'd say Baratta is important for me, and then this is all. Okay.
All right, Q. Very nice, very nice. Thanks, Sergio. Very impressive presentation. Cheers. Valeria, over to you.
Perfect. 1 second. Can you see it correctly?
Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you. Okay, so let me put the timer. Yep, great. So changing the topic completely from ordinary crimes and prison to state crime, criminology, and transitional justice. So different sides of the criminal justice sphere. My presentation will be learning from the South, state crime criminology, transitional justice, and the role of victims organizations in Argentina. So, whoa, what happened? 1 second. Yeah, here, sorry. So, my point of departure is that even though most of state crimes in terms of war, civil conflict, and dictatorships and transitional justice processes happens in the global South, the ones who get to credit mostly are the ones in the global North. As I was discussing with Julieta by email, it seems that the South is putting the death and the North is putting the literature, the scholarship, in her own words. I find the metaphor very enlightening. And this, I have seen it firsthand in a very simple example that I wanted to share with you. That is when I was doing fieldwork in Africa in 2017, in Ethiopia and in Kenya. I found out that the textbooks to learn English in Ethiopia, they show the letter A showing an apple, even though in Ethiopia there are no apples. So the people had to learn the letter A, which is not part of the alphabet, that has other characters. They have to learn that there is something called an apple, and they have to learn all of that while learning another language. This happens despite the fact that their language starts with A, and the capital city of Ethiopia also starts with A. So a little bit of cultural involvement at the moment of writing the textbooks for Ethiopia would have brought better examples to learn the letter A. And something similar, I think, that might happen when we study state crime criminology and transitional justice. So how can we bring this Southern perspective to these fields of study? Well, with these 3 dimensions, understanding the South as a geographic indicator, of course, of neocolonial and low-income countries that are mostly located in the global South, but there are also many global North countries located in the global South, so this category is tricky. As a geographic metaphor, so within each city, within each region, within each country, we also have small Souths. It's not the same to be in Paris than in the countryside in terms of the voices that are heard when we are discussing massive human rights violations. And as a demographic metaphor, which I mean that it involves listening and hearing the disadvantaged sectors that are the ones that suffer the massive human rights violations, but are the ones that don't get to theorize about their suffering. So how this Southern perspective, absent so far, look like case-wise in terms of transitional justice? Well, we can see that in most transitional justice textbooks, Germany appears as the main model. The model of confronting the past, the model of overcoming the Holocaust, the Nuremberg trials, all the symbolic things like the memorials, the museums. But if we check the case study most closely, this is one of my 3 case studies, Kenya, Germany, and Argentina, we will find out that the statistics and the general overview is way more dreadful than expected. For example, 70% of the overall convictions in Germany were passed by 1949. So from 1949 to today, there were only 30% of the convictions. So like cases went like this. And they went like this when the victims left the displaced camps. So most of the cases were fostered by the victims, by the survivors. Germany itself was very, very, very reluctant to ensure accountability. And overall, we will see that over millions of people involved in the Holocaust, we only have 1,200 Nazi Germans convicted of homicide. And this is only justice. I could talk about the German process at length, and we will see that it's not as incredible as expected. We have Argentina on the other side of the spectrum, which is mentioned since the work of Katrin Sicking and other pieces of scholarship that were written in the global north, but still is not considered a model at the same level than Germany, even though it has been carrying on justice for 40 years, despite periods of impunity, despite periods in which the government was not supportive of human rights policies. And we have a total of 3,000 accused with a very narrower scope of perpetrators in relationship with Germany. But nevertheless, Germany still appears as a global north example of a model of transitional justice, and Argentina not so much, showing this lack of case southern orientation when we decide what is a model to approach a field of study. And how this southern perspective would look conceptually in terms of transitional justice and state corporate crime, state crime and state corporate crime. Well, the mainstream narrative is that we need to aim for victim-centeredness. What does it say? It says this argument says that states usually conduct the procedures in terms of truth, justice, memory, without considering the victims, and that victims should participate more. This is the northern perspective when seeing how the processes are conducted worldwide and particularly in the South. But from a Southern perspective, building upon all the experience of the social movements in the South and all the experience of our history in Latin America, and particularly in Argentina, I want to argue that instead of the victim-centered approach issued and coined in the North, from the South, we could argue that challenging state crimes and pursuing transformative and lasting changes is more feasible if victims are not involved, are not participated, but have the potential to overcome the help industry and assume a collective, proactive, and leading role, independent from power holders. So not the involvement, not the victim-centeredness theory or proposal that was developed in the global North, but this bottom-up idea that comes not from my own mind, but from the experience of the social movements and the victims organizations that have been working in the South for many years. So the idea is that the direct level of victims' involvement has an impact in the effectiveness in terms of the transitional justice indicators that are truth, justice, reparations, and guarantees of non-repetition. So my research works with qualitative and quantitative data. I don't have it for today's presentation, it's on process, but the idea is to be able to test this hypothesis with mixed methods. So how does it work? With victims in the South and particularly in Argentina, showing that they had developed an independent and collective agenda along with civil society, that they have not been heard or considered in an official process, but that victims rather provoke national and international acknowledgement of the human rights violations and their legacy, that there was not just resistance or contestation or taking advantage of existing opportunities, but they helped create new structures and opportunities at the national and international level. So there was no participation in others' initiatives, but rather a leadership in public policy. And why it should work? It should work well because it's what the experience shows us, but conceptually it should work because victims are the most affected by human rights violations. They have relevant information about the truth of what happened. They know, of course, what kind of reparations they need. They are intimately interested in achieving justice, and they have perceptions of the institutional and cultural changes that are necessary to avoid repetition. So let's take a look about how this victim-driven, in opposed to the victim-centered, and this focus on the South rather than in the North, should look like by studying the Argentinian case. So you know that we have a very painful history with a lot of dictatorships and coup d'etats, but maybe the most terrible one and the one that really started this transitional justice process was the last one, 1976-1983, because of the extension of the human rights violation, the neoliberal character of the coup, the involvement of civilians and religious leaders, the forced disappearances and the appropriation of children that appear as new features. And here, only think about names, you will see that when dealing with literature developed in the global north, they usually refer to the Argentinian case as a dirty war, which is a concept that has been largely overcome in the national discussion when we have to refer to this dictatorship. And instead, we refer to civil military dictatorship or state terrorism. And this is not just nomenclature, it's not just a name that is random, but it means that the paradigm and the conceptualization of the dictatorship has changed. But of course, scholars that only come to do very narrow field work, they cannot embrace all these cultural changes, and they still call this dirty war, showing one of the problematic features of omitting a Southern perspective. So Argentina was part of the Plan Condor, an overall continental a network of military juntas that were perpetrating massive human rights violations. It was not an outliner. But I want to focus on Argentina in this enforcement of the 4 pillars of transitional justice: truth, justice, reparations, and guarantees of non-repetition, and how this has been done basically from a bottom-up perspective with the leadership of the victims. I studied the 10 victims organizations, the 10 existing organizations, but today, of course, I will focus only on one, that are the grandmothers, because they are the ones that are more idyllic, that they are most well-known worldwide. These are the mothers and grandmothers of the disappeared, that they were looking for the remains of their children and for the abducted grandchildren that were handed over to military families. And this picture is very moving because it shows how the victims, the grandmothers and mothers, keep on fighting today. Here you see 2 in wheelchairs, but there are many others that are super active. This includes Nora Cortinas, who is now leading the fight for feminism and the fight for the legalization of abortion that we got last year. So she's at the forefront of social struggles that go beyond the dictatorship claims. So to provide just a few examples in terms of truth, even while the dictatorship was ongoing, the grandmothers got to contact the Pope to bring up the problem of the children that were abducted. They conducted massive mobilizations despite the state of emergency. They found 8 grandchildren that were abducted, even when the dictatorship was still in power. After the dictatorship, they collaborated massively with the CONADEP, the Truth Commission, providing testimonies despite the fact that still the military was very powerful and we were not sure about the stability of the new democratic regime. They even engaged with scientists to develop the DNA test to prove the relationship between grandmothers and grandchildren, and with the forensic anthropology team to be able to identify the identity of the remains that were found, among many other things. And the efforts continue now, working with formal documents that were obtained about the involvement of the CEI, the involvement of the church, the involvement of the media. And they are still, of course, fighting for the recovering of the grandchildren, even with new strategies. For example, this year, the strategy is for the first time to focus exclusively in the exile, because they think that maybe they are grandchildren that are in Europe. So now we are like really fighting to identify and to disseminate the message of the grandmothers that keep on looking for their grandchildren, and that this might be in Europe without any knowledge that they are related to Argentina. In terms of justice, we had a very difficult history with impunity, impunity, justice, but nevertheless, even in the most difficult moments, the victims got to go beyond what it was expected from the state to ensure accountability. So in the junta trials, that is our Nuremberg, it was mostly possible because of victims' testimonies. Victims were there testifying and eager to testify, despite the fact that their lives could still be under threat. Then, when we had a long period of almost 30 years of impunity, the victims got to develop different legal strategies to overcome the situation of impunity, including the truth trials that are maybe one of the most interesting experiences, that meant that even though criminal accountability could not be obtained, they fought to clarify what was happening in terms of truth. So they asked the tribunals to conduct trials to ensure that victims would know what happened to their beloved ones, despite the fact that the courts were unable to issue a specific sentencing. And the victims kept on fighting even when the government changed again in 2015, and it was reluctant to keep on enforcing human rights policies. And here you can see a massive demonstration that was against privileged counting of the time that the genocides, the perpetrators had spent in pretrial detention. So including massive engagement with civil society, and they go to overturn this sentencing. So this is just like a very brief overview to show you some examples of how victims were enforcing justice and truth despite the support or not support of the governments. Of course, when the government was there for them, it was possible to go even beyond. Well, in reparations, we have a lot of examples in terms of guarantees of non-repetition. Here we see that that before the pandemic, the mothers and grandmothers still went to the Plaza de Mayo to keep on doing their demonstrations every Thursday. They engaged famous people like Messi, because many people might not know who is Stella de Carlotto, but everybody knows who is Messi. So they have the creativity of engaging public figures to foster their3 They engage with culture, theater for the identity. They got involved in international agreements. For example, 3 of the articles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child acknowledge the rights to identity, thanks to the work of the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. And they established these paintings of their handkerchiefs throughout the cities, just to provide some examples. And also they have the creativity of keep on fighting despite the pandemic, because Argentina is a country where everything happens in the street, like with big demonstration, with engagement, with face-to-face. But with the pandemic, that was impossible. But nevertheless, they got to develop very good strategies. Last year, it was a white handkerchief, so we were all invited to upload handkerchiefs and drawings in the social media, so that we could spread the message that memory was still present in our country. And this year with Let's Plant Memory. So the invitation was to plant trees in our own homes or in the public sphere in order to commemorate the persistence of memory. So just to close the discussion, the proposal that I want to say is that building upon the work of Máximo with Southern Criminology, and also the work of Boaventura de Sousa Santo, is this idea that our experience in the South has specific characteristics, specific features, and that is very much related with the social movements work on the street, on the forefront. So on this basis, we can say that maybe we still need to dispute what is considered as a model worldwide. And if, for example, in terms of transitional justice, Germany should still be regarded as a model, or if a more thoughtful understanding and a focus on the South could, for example, raise Argentina as a possible model of a transformative transition, and conceptually trying to change this victim-centered or victim participation model that still is the state of the art in transitional justice and state crime criminology, and develop this victim-driven approach, which pays specific attention to the role of victims from below, acting with the governments when the political opportunities are available, or even against the political aim, the political goals, the political stand when conditions are adverse. I leave you with 3 movies to engage with some art about the process, and we discuss in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Valeria, for this amazing presentation. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. So now we could go to Stefan comments. So.
Yes, indeed. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to provide some comments. I'll try to keep it short because time is running, and of course our our presentations have been so rich. But nevertheless, please allow me to give some comments and ask some questions. And even if they may not be all answered in this session, we can continue the debate. It's never finished, of course. First of all, on Sergio's paper, which I found very interesting, I would like to raise the following comments. I was intrigued by the argumentation that is used sometimes to promote this very interesting project. And you've talked in your paper about the recidivism rate, which is lower than with people who do not go through this kind of process. And also that the cost of setting up these projects in the long run is lower than the incarceration in a classical way, let's say. So we know these arguments, they're mostly economic and often used by politicians to convince the broader public. But of course, they can also lead very quickly to some kind of managerialism and so some kind of efficiency strategy, which may detract actually from the original idea, which you seem to suggest is the restorative approach and the reintegrative approach. And maybe here is a question to you: what exactly the concept of reintegration in this project means? I could think for at least of 4 different types and probably more. There's legal reintegration in the sense of finishing your sentence and going back to society. But you also indicated, well, that's probably not the only one. There's also social reintegration into families, into communities, and so on. There could be economic reintegration. People do learn trades in the prison, but then when they come out, they seem to have problems in finding a job. So in that sense, the economic reintegration may not be that successful. And then I was wondering if you could also talk about political reintegration, but then, of course, from a perspective of trying to look at etiologies and the reasons why crimes are committed, the cultures of violence, the unequal distribution of resources in many communities. So if we talk about reintegration, would it then mean that they go back to the same difficult political conditions? Of course, it also raises all kinds of other issues, and I'm sure we can discuss it further. But one particular theoretical framework that I found inspiring as well is the social bond theory of Travis Hershey. Well, it's a northern theory, of course, but because he sort of identifies these various bonds to society, and which is not only interesting and relevant in terms of dealing with crime after it has been committed, but also as a prevention strategy. And I was just wondering if it might have some relevance to think along those lines and to connect the social bond theory on the one hand with the reintegration concept that you may have, or that the project may have, rather, on the other hand. As to Valeria's paper, well, presentation, first of all, the paper is a bit different, it's far more extensive, but it holds very interesting ideas as well. You have basically started from a Southern criminology perspective, not only in geographical terms, but also in conceptual terms, by saying, well, this is not only about something that happened in the South, but it actually provides input for a different analysis of the way in which civil society and social movements work in the South. Here again, that political element is so important. It's a resistance against state crime, against political crime, against serious human rights violations. And I think you put very well at the center the idea of victim agency. And not only in the terms of participating in procedures and being vocal and write about it and demonstrate, but literally the fact that processes in Argentina then at least have been victim driven. Would it have been possible to think of a truth commission, for example, without the victim involvement in the first place? Or the trials themselves, of course, and the trials of fact are not a fact of the past. They're as much a reality of the present. They do go on, And I found it intriguing that you say, shouldn't we then change our conception and call the Argentinian model maybe the model? That is interesting, but also a bit tricky, because I was wondering whether Southern criminology at the basis does not mean the plurality of models. Whether it's Germany or Argentina, well, Germany at that time, for those kind of crimes, in that particular context, may have been a model and may still serve as a model, but Argentina in its own right, at that particular moment in time, may serve as another one. So could you also think not only about modeling, but plurality of modeling, and that goes very much into the direction of plurality, well, like legal pluralism, social, semi-autonomous social fields even, that could be different in the core and the periphery, and then I'll leave it to decide what is the core and the periphery, because that's a debate in itself. So I found both papers really interesting. They raise all kinds of issues, and the final point that may connect them is actually the fundamental question: where do you think lies the fundamental contribution of Southern criminology? Is it in the geography to highlight cases from the South, whatever and however you want to define the South, or is it more in the conceptual way of thinking? The bottom up, the strong social movement kind of effect, and possibly other ways of thinking again. So with this, I would like to open maybe or put some open questions, and I'm sure you will have some ideas about it. Thank you so much.